All right. Good morning. Welcome back. We have moved on to March and a little bit of the rain. I hope that you have been doing well so far in the quarter. I apologize for not getting the extra credit prompt available yet. However, I am going to give you more time to work on that until that kind of end of quarter cutoff on the 19th. Just to give you a preview for what I'll be posting for that later today. The extra credit opportunity is in which I'll ask you to look at an outside article in sort of a related field like communication studies or media studies that relates to issues of small group communication and membership. And I'll ask you to sort of explain and report on this article and its findings. So I'll be sharing the full prompt a little bit later today. Extra credit. I like to give one opportunity in every class. If you do it, it'll add 20 points or 2% onto your final grade. You can't do multiple extra credits. You can't turn it in multiple times for more extra credit, but you can do if you're on the bubble, if you're close to the grade that you want, but not quite there, or you want some additional help to give yourself a buffer. So I wanted to let you know that that'll be coming up, and I'll be posting that along with some more information there. To get us started for today, I wanted to remind you about the observation presentation schedule. Again, we have folks that are scheduled for presentation next Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Please make sure to double check your presentation time. Make sure that you're available and ready to present in person on your scheduled date. Please email me as soon as you can if you know that you can't make that date or you have some kind of issue so that I can help you reschedule you. Remember, presentation can't be made up unless there's an emergency or issue that comes up for you. And then I'll still be taking attendance on the other days. Ask that you participate, you're involved and supportive as an audience member to other people that are presenting on those days, including on the day that you're scheduled to present as well. So we'll go down in order through that list, and the presentation should be about 5 to 6 minutes on either your completed work on your group's observation or the progress that you've been making toward it. So by that point, you should have done the observation itself and are just trying to compile and put together the final thing. So just reminding you about the schedule, the order in which people are presenting, and just to make sure that we're all on the same page there. The other thing that I adjusted based on your own feedback and sort of doing a quick poll on Monday is this Friday is attendance optional. Basically, the way that I'll handle Friday is I'll be here and I'll be available if you need a quiet place to work. If you'd like to work actively with me on answering questions, or you need any sort of additional support related to either your observation essay or to your presentation itself. I thought sounds like people have a lot of stress and things going on in their other classes. Having the time to sort of sit down, really work on and develop this project, I thought was a good opportunity for Friday. Since you do have that essay due by Sunday, and we'll be gearing up for presentations the following week. Also, there's that week 8 quiz, the final week 9 quiz. That'll be due on the following Sunday, and I'll be extending out the extra credit since I wasn't able to get that out until today. So just as a reminder, the end of the quarter when I have to turn in grades is on the 19th. So just make sure if you have any remaining or outstanding assignments to get them in for me. One thing that I really recommend is that you double check for attendance, right? So each day I've been entering in attendance out of 8 points. If you missed 3 or fewer classes, that is just, it doesn't have a grade, it's blank for those days that you missed. But if you've missed more than 3, right, it counts as 0 for those additional days that you've missed. Just verify that that's accurate, or let me know through completing a makeup assignment, and then I'll cover that day that you missed. So just double check that, making sure you've got the attendance stuff in and you've made up if you have more than 3 absences. Is just a way to help your grade as you're getting close to the end of the quarter. Remember, the makeup assignment is just a kind of 1-page sort of reflection on progress. Yeah.
If we have a late one, can we get half credit for it, or
a late attendance? Yes.
Yeah.
So I can give you partial credit for if you're turning that in a bit later. Remember too, if you have 3 or fewer unexcused absences, then that's not going to impact the grade. Awesome. So that's kind of the calendar and schedule at a glance. Any questions so far or anything? Awesome. So just a few kind of recaps since I covered a lot of ground, and we'll get into some of the new stuff for today. I talked a little bit about the presentation schedule. Again, it's just 5 to 6 minutes. 6 minutes, though, is the hard limit. I will cut you off if you get much past the 6 minutes. That way we can fit everybody into next week. Please present face-to-face unless for some reason you're not able to do so. You contacted me in advance, like you're on the board team, let me know. You can send me those visual aids that you're planning to use, for example, slides in advance. That way I can get those fired up for you so that it's all ready when you're scheduled to present. I recommend, as a rule of thumb, having like one slide outside of the title for like each minute or two. So honestly, you might only need just 3 or 4 slides. If you include like 20, there's no way you're going to be able to get through that in about 5 to 6 minutes. So having seen that myself, I think a lot of slides might affect your ability to meet the time limit. And so I just went over a few tips and things to know about that. Also for your presentation, it's not about being an amazing public speaker, formal speaking ability, right? I'm not grading things like delivery, like for a public speaking class. I'm instead looking for, you have a few things to say about your presentation. Have you done some rehearsal and preparation, right? And are you kind of getting it within that time limit? I definitely recommend practicing, rehearsing, seeing if you can get in that 5 to 6 minute range. And if you want to do practice with me, I'm happy to give you feedback if you run it by me, either face-to-face or Zoom. So we took some time last class, talked a little bit about those things, a little bit about conflict and some of the ways that it impacts our small group communication, right? So conflict is a really big issue that we encounter when we participate in groups. I had you all share on Monday some of the ways that you all experience conflict in groups and some of the common themes about dealing with a person that might be especially troublemaker or disrupting the flow of the group, not feeling like everybody's on the same page, or some of the concerns that we brought to the table. We talked last class about the idea that conflict is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Conflict is kind of neutral. It's just sort of an issue that comes up, right? It's an inevitability. The question then becomes, how do we deal with or address that conflict? And the constructive approaches to doing so, letting people speak their mind, coming to a decision, working together through things like consensus or voting, are great ways to ensure that people are heard. And again, remember that just because a group doesn't experience conflict does not mean that that group is healthy or in good shape. We've been talking about groupthink and the idea that people will self-censor views that disagree with the group if they don't feel open or comfortable sharing those views, right? When we looked at things like the Challenger explosion, obviously having somebody engage in conflict, speak out, and about 14 lives. So we don't necessarily want to avoid conflict in every situation. It can be a force for good if it helps us to reach a better conclusion on an issue. We talked about some of these fundamental assumptions about conflict as well. Deals with limited resources or goods, that it can't be avoided, right? It's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. You try to hit it or get rid of the conflict and it just pops up somewhere later. And then toward the end of class, we didn't get to this in a whole lot of time, so I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about these 4 different styles of leadership when it comes to addressing conflict, right? So this first style would be a leader as motivator, right? So for instance, if you're part of coaching, like a high school athletic team, and you have a student in the group who is getting into fights, getting into arguments with other people, causing a bit of a ruckus, right? A leader as motivator says, hey, we need to work together and have this person feel included and no longer be a troublemaker in the group. It's a very kind of gung-ho, excited, I'm going to proactively address deal with this conflict, right? Leader as motivator can be empowering when it comes to addressing or dealing with the conflict. It can help people feel like they're taking charge and developing strategy. The problem is with this approach that it treats conflict as something that can just be solved and then it's over, right? And what we know from working in groups is that conflict is not something that goes away so easily. There's feelings, there's concerns, there's patterns of behavior that remain long after the initial discussion or potential resolution to the conflict, right? There's a reason that the class we offer at EOU is called conflict management and not conflict resolution. If we are super compelled to resolve a conflict in every situation, we don't necessarily take the work to deal with it as an ongoing process. We can't always put conflict in a neat little bow. Maybe the behavioral issues or concerns that student on the team has are going to persist into the future. And so we need to figure out how to support them longer term. It's not just one incident, right? A leader as a delegator is about tasking responsibilities to others in the group or to an organization, right? So the less charitable reading is that you kick the can down the road, refer to somebody else, say, it's not my problem, go handle this. However, right, a good leader as delegator is somebody that can provide expertise and support to people that need them. If you're on high school, you're coaching a high school football team, you have a student who is acting out, has behavioral issues, maybe there's a psychologist or therapist that you can refer them to help them out and provide that kind of expert care that they would need, right? You're giving them somebody that is better able to address the concerns that you can't deal with yourself. So delegation can be useful if it's out of your league. A leader as structuralist is essentially somebody that uses the structure and organization of the group as a way of dealing with conflict. So the best way that I could describe this would be if we think back to Robert's Rules of Order and the sort of structural ways of holding meetings, right? If somebody, for instance, says a personal insult or makes fun of somebody else, says, hey, you said something dumb. The leader of structuralist approach would be to raise a point of personal privilege and say, you use personalized insult, and then there's like a formal procedure for handling that. So sometimes when you're setting up good boundaries and good structure and good rules for your meetings or for your group behavior, you have that as an opportunity to deal with the problem. For instance, if you are part of an extracurricular group on campus, it's a good chance you sign some type of agreement. If you're in violation of that agreement, like you stop going to meetings, then they can use that information for you. And a leader is constructive as a promoter of constructive deviation is essentially encouraging people to invite outside views and to play devil's advocate to disagree. And in fact, in those situations, leaders could instigate conflict by encouraging people to openly disagree and share their views of the group, right? An advantage to this approach is that it's easily able to circumvent groupthink. Disadvantage is sometimes it can feel like the leader is not invested in the success of the group and is just trying to spark conflict for the sake of conflict and problems, right? A good example of constructive deviation, some of the kind of tech and video game companies, one that I point to is Valve, the creators of games like Portal, Half-Life, similar titles, right, are very open in the style of work and production of games and really encourage people to openly speak out and disagree and present new ideas to the table. So it's a very kind of egalitarian approach. So that kind of style of group organization can really allow for open discussion and a lot of interesting and creative ideas. So today, we're going to explore more issues related to conflict, including some of the interpersonal strategies and ways that we can improve our skills in managing conflict as well. And I'll be giving you a scenario for the class that will involve us figuring out how we deal with conflict ourselves in the past when we participate in things like group presentation. Pictured here on the right is Dr. Stella King-Toomey. If you have taken interpersonal or similar classes with me, I've talked a little bit about this. But Dr. King-Toomey is the creator of what is known as face negotiation theory. Face negotiation theory is a kind of non-Western approach and way of thinking about how we manage our personal relationships with other people. If you have ever heard the expression saving face, right? Saving face refers to the idea that we're managing our reputation and well-being with other people to maintain good relationships and good connections, right? I recently watched, finally, for several years, the South Korean film Parasite, right? It's a really interesting example, not to get into spoilers, of characters who kind of put up a front or use face-saving behavior to portray themselves as credible, as professional, in ways that they might not be, right? But face-saving behavior is a way of providing that kind of front and external behavior that shows that you're a good person or trustworthy person. So in this way, if we think about this in terms of conflict, right? We as people want to maintain good reputations. We want to have good relationships with other people. We want to be liked and we want to be supported, right? When we feel like we are personally insulted or we're not valued as human beings, right? That can really hurt the credibility of the group. What that means for us when we're managing and dealing with conflict then is to think about what types of ways of addressing conflict can best maintain the reputation and well-being of everybody in the group. In other words, a face-saving strategy is a good approach. It means that we're protecting the credibility of the people in the group we're speaking. If you're insulting somebody, if you're embarrassing them, if you say, hey, you're wrong, right, and really publicly call them out, there's a good chance that their response will be to withdraw, to feel disrespected, to not feel like they can engage with it, right? One of the easiest ways to create a good and positive relationship that deals with conflict is separating the messenger from the message, right? So I'm a big fan of identifying and critiquing logical fallacies. You take the classic argumentative writing, rhetoric, that gets into things like that in a lot more detail. A logical fallacy is an argument gone wrong, right? It's an argument that is missing a lot of parts or has a lot of gaps, right? So if you go down to the comment section of the internet, you'll see a lot of logical fallacies. One of them is the ad hominem fallacy. That an ad hominem fallacy is attacking the person rather than attacking the argument or content that they have to say, right? You see this all the time in the sort of reductive platitudes of political debate in which people are not necessarily talking about the topic, they're talking about the people and their opinions of the people's personalities. The downside, right, to using an ad hominem or attack on a person's character rather than their message is that sometimes those two things aren't necessarily connected or related. Somebody that you disagree with or don't like could say a message that is true or correct, but attacking the person doesn't really attack their argument, right? In the same way, to save face, we want to separate those things out. We could have a person that we really like, we really respect and enjoy working with, but we profoundly disagree with what they have to say. And that's okay, right? When we're able to separate those things out, we more openly encourage people to share their views and to avoid groupthink. If somebody feels sort of personally attacked for expressing a view that not everybody in the group agrees with, then that creates a sort of chilling effect where over and over, they're less compelled to participate. So that's the face detraction strategy, right? Is one in which you're taking away the respect of the person, sort of publicly questioning or calling them out, hurting their integrity or credibility, right? And of course, there are situations where that makes sense to do. If somebody is being openly destructive or hurtful for the group, and that needs to be identified, right? When somebody, for instance, has said or done behavior that is really sexist or racist or hurtful to the group, sometimes that does need to be called out in a more direct way. But when it comes to addressing like a conflict, like I want this person hired for the job, no, I want this person hired for the job, right? It's important to kind of create that respectful disagreement that avoids personal attacks. That means defensive communication is this practice of using things such as trolling, trying to manage the situation or avoid people from expressing their views, evaluating or judging the group, and that more supportive strategies for addressing conflict again can focus on the message itself. So one way of thinking about and dealing with group conflict, right? If you've ever heard, you probably heard this metaphor in a few classes, or even done an activity yourself related to this. This idea that we all like carry a backpack is kind of interesting one, right? You might literally be doing that for a few folks that are here today. I continue to use a backpack because, you know, I went to school and kind of never stopped. So in that way, right, when you have a backpack, you're carrying some type of weight. You're carrying a lot of things every day in your meetings, in your group memberships, in your relationships. And what you're carrying with you, of course, is going to impact the ways in which you behave and interact with group. For instance, right, if you find yourself tired, stressed, dealing with exams, maybe, you know, you've had a crisis come up in your family, maybe your dog has gone missing, and there's all sorts of things happening in your life, right? That stuff is carrying with you when you participate in groups. And, you know, that's okay, that's life. But that is going to impact the way that you approach and deal with conflicts and problems that come up, right? If you're underslept, if you're feeling stressed out, you're more likely to be short with people. You might be less able to follow the conversations of the group, and you might find that you're less able to contribute ideas well. And again, that's normal. That's the reality of humans living in 2022, right? So we're kind of dealing with those concerns as we engage with the group. What that means, though, is that we have to be extra careful for how we manage and address some of those feelings in groups. So, for instance, we want to avoid making a kind of rash response or, you know, response to a message that's based on anger. A really good approach to doing this is what's called the Jefferson Rule. When you're in a group, right, you do not have to speak as often. You have a smaller slice of pie. One way of doing that effectively, then, is to count to 10 in your head. If you hear a message that you pretty profoundly disagree with, and wait, that'll do a couple things. First of all, maybe you'll decide the message, the thing you wanted to say that you were going to say in reaction, you decide it's just not a good thing to say. You're going to avoid that and avoid saying something you might. Secondarily, it lets you cool off a little bit. And if you do decide to address the issue, you're able to do so in a more constructive way. Another approach that can be really helpful, right, is if you're using like asynchronous communication, like a text or like an email, give yourself 24 hours before you respond. I'll give you a tip, right? If you're ever in a class and you get a grade back and you do not like the grade that you got and you disagree with the grade that you got and you want to like have an argument or express your disagreement with your professor about the grade that you got, right? I think that's a good thing to do. I think it's good for instructors to be accountable and honest about the grade that they got. However, give yourself 24 hours, and there's a good chance that you'll have a more reasoned and developed argument in response. In fact, some instructors will have a policy where they say, I won't respond to grade disputes unless 24 hours have passed. But give yourself a little time, and there's a good chance you'll be able to develop a better argument for your concerns about the grade. So again, that span of time can help to sort of refocus emotion toward particular action. When you receive some type of evaluation or feedback, right, it's a good idea to listen without interrupting, because usually when somebody has feedback or has a response for you, they want to make sure to get that out there. They've taken some time to prepare, right, and you want to make sure that you fully understand the message. In other words, right, when we, for instance, if you have a coach who watches you perform, you know, maybe you're doing like, you're involved with acting and you do script or monologue or part of your performance, right? You would let that director or coach or teacher express their perspective first to make sure that you understand what they have to say before you respond, right? If you immediately kind of start to respond to the evaluation or message, then you might miss the overall thing that they have to say. Intent is difficult. In fact, in many situations, it's impossible for us to know what the exact intent of what somebody is saying or doing in a group might be. For instance, if somebody is playing devil's advocate and disagreeing with the ideas presented in a group, you could think, well, maybe they're really trying to help the group and help explore everything, or maybe they're just being annoying, trying to stir the pot, trying to create drama. So trying to figure out, what do I know about this person and their background, and how can I figure out if they're being credible or honest in their approach is a good thing too. Indicating that you're listening, right? So a few of you are in my Calm 330 class. We've been talking a little bit about listening. One of the biggest ways to indicate listening is non-verbally, right? Things such as using nodding, eye contact, taking notes, minimizing or avoiding distractions like devices are ways to indicate that you're listening and paying attention. Sometimes you can use verbal responses too, like saying, yeah, and doing so in a way that makes sense. And paraphrasing is another kind of verbal response where you can indicate that you understand the message. In fact, right, one of the biggest sources of conflict is miscommunication, that two people do not understand where they're coming from and why they disagree. And at times, right, we'll create what's known as a straw person, right? Straw person is a logical fallacy where somebody portrays a disagreeing opinion in as bad for them and good for you as possible. In other words, right, it's sort of like when we see a lot of political discussion and debate. You'll have people on one side of the aisle say, oh, they're the worst person in the world, they're awful, they're un-American. And then over there on the other side, they'll say, they're awful, they're un-American, right? It's this very kind of caricature view of an opposing perspective. It makes your own perspective look much better by comparison. One really good practice to avoid and deal with issues that can come up, right, is if you're in conflict, that you ask the other person to state your perspective or to share your perspective as they understand it. And then that way you can say, hey, no, I didn't say that, or that's not my opinion. I think you're misunderstanding where I'm coming from here, right? Misunderstanding and miscommunication builds and builds like a snowball, and that can create a big source of friction in it. So there's ways that you can manage and try to create some better communication in the group. One of them, right, is if you're called out, if you find that you're receiving feedback or somebody is indicating, hey, I don't appreciate some of the ways that you raise your voice or express your concerns with the group, you could say, hey, I can provide an apology and figure out how to go forward. I think a lot of times we don't really talk about what a good apology looks like, right? I think a good apology involves saying, I'm sorry. A lot of people miss that first step, right? And you get like roundabout fake apologies. For instance, I'm sorry that you feel that way, or I apologize if you interpreted my actions in this way, right? Which isn't really you taking responsibility. It's you trying to say that they have taken a decision or made a decision to interpret material in a way. So say that you're sorry, take ownership. Explain what it is that you're apologizing for. Do you acknowledge or understand what you did wrong? And then, and I think this is perhaps the most missing step, what are the things you are going to do to prevent that issue from happening again? You'll say, hey, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to try to speak more calmly and quietly and not raise my voice so much. And again, focusing on points rather than the person. Taking notes to try to understand the emotions or feelings that people come from a little bit. So when I was growing up, oftentimes I kind of had like a very neutral expression that kind of looked like I was angry or frustrated. It was just like normal. And sometimes people misunderstood me as being angry. They were like, "What's wrong?" And you're like, "Why are you stone faced?" And I was like, "Well, I'm fine, right?" So oftentimes we can misunderstand each other and how we're feeling. Maybe somebody furrows their brows and seems angry, but actually they're thinking about another issue that's happened in their life, right? So try to match up the emotions and figure out what's going on. Oftentimes we misinterpret that. There are things we can and can't control, right? Life happens while we're making plans. We've noticed that over the last couple of years. To try to do what you can to help a group to tackle and deal with some complex problems is a good approach. When it comes to conflict, right? Conflict can be really destructive when it impacts and implicates all the other things that a group can do. So the best way to deal with conflict when things escalate is to prevent it from doing damage, right? It's the same way that the best thing that you can do for a car accident is prevention, right? So having a plan might mean saying, hey, when conflict emerges, we'll have a separate time for discussion, and then we need to move on. Another strategy that works well is if you're a leader or a manager in a group and things are escalating, to move on, give people a chance to cool off, and then ask people in the next meeting to kind of recap or come back to the potential issue and conflict when they've had a bit more time to think about it, and maybe can approach it in a less heightened way, right? Put a pin on it, come back to it later. The emotions will probably be going a bit better. Remember the commitment, the goals. What is the group trying to do? Hey, we're all trying to pass and get the grade on the exam that we want. This is why a lot of team-based films will have a lot of tension or conflict in the group, and then you get this motivating, inspiring speech from the leader or manager, right? A lot of shows and movies that have sports teams will do this. You're Friday Night Lights or Remember the Titans have a lot of examples of these. Figuring out detrimental versus beneficial conflict, right? Beneficial conflict generates new ideas. It lets you rethink and reconsider perspectives. It lets people explore new ideas. Detrimental conflict is focused on personal attacks, making fun of people, and not really creating a good opportunity for people to work together. Always ask, if you're instigating conflict, right? What is this doing? Why am I throwing a wrench at things? And do I genuinely believe that this will help the group, or do I think this will just help me? And then remind people that folks that disagree, that play devil's advocate, that share an opposing perspective are valued, that they contribute to and help the group. That having disagreeing and dissenting perspectives can make things better. And creating that kind of open space for people to honestly share their views is seen as a good thing. So if you've ever played kind of a game like D&D, right, or you're part of a Discord server or group, you've done things like games online, there's a lot of different ways that people within those groups will manage or deal with potential conflicts, right? Obviously, you're not going to flip the board over and, basically mess up the entire game if you're losing. Although I did that when I was playing Sorry in the Game of Life when I was younger with my sister. Now she never wants to play board games with me again, even though I swear I've gotten better. So when we play a board game, when we do something as a group together, we're making some level of agreement with each other, right? That we're not going to flip the board over and that we are going to play the game by the rules. So some of the ways that we can manage and deal with conflict effectively in groups, first of all, is test the waters, right? If you are a part, for instance, of a philosophy club, and you say, I think we really need to have this specific guest speaker come to our campus, and you get really stuck on that specific speaker coming to campus, right? If you are adamant, say they have to go there, then that can create conflict in the group. People might say, hey, I actually really like this person instead. What if we had this guest speaker? Or what if we had multiple guest speakers or roundtable and you say, no, we need this one person? That can be an issue, right? If you grandstand and focus on one thing in an unchanging way. If you have an idea to present to the group, one really constructive address that is to pitch it, right? To test the waters and say, hey, there's this person who's this up and coming philosopher who has some really cool ideas. What about the possibility of inviting them to campus, right? Pose your ideas as invitations, not as ultimatums. Identify something that people agree on, right? I don't know how many folks watched the State of the Union last night, but one thing that I found interesting was that there were a couple situations in which you'd have people stand and give applause from different sides of the chamber. And there were a couple situations where there were some points made where there was like agreement, right, or rhetorical moves that were attempting to find commonality. And folks regardless of political party do that. But the goal here is to say when there's such polarization and disagreement between views, where's the common ground, right? And finding common ground or shared values can oftentimes be a starting point to better understand and deal with areas where people do disagree. That center of the Venn diagram. Active listening, again, is really trying to understand and make sense of the message, paying attention to nonverbal cues, really being invested in the message and what's being said. Steering things back on topic. If things are getting personal, if they're getting heated, if they're getting away from where they should be, helping to redirect would be a good idea. Framing the discussion as a problem to be solved, right? This is an issue we need to work on together, creates that kind of leader as motivator momentum. Your partners on a common quest, again, it's like D&D or like a similar game where you're working together to try to accomplish tasks together. And big scary dragon is instead you all don't agree on what to do. And right, one thing to think about is oftentimes when we're engaged in conflict, we like to win, right? We like to get the last word in. And one impulse we have to push back against is being right versus getting it right, or doing what we need to do, right? If you disagree about a nitty-gritty factual piece of information, like you're like having an argument with somebody about a percentage or a statistic or something like that, does it actually help the group, or are you trying to, win the debate? So sometimes it's strategic to refocus or see or shift discussion. And also, right, there are some moments where you have people who have intractable disagreements, and maybe it might take too much time to try to persuade each other, and it's okay to agree to disagree and move on, right? Conflict is about shared resources and the idea that people have different perspectives on issues. Maybe there are things that you can't easily come to an agreement on. Lastly, before I do an activity for today, I want to talk a little bit about some of the interpersonal components. In interpersonal communication, we talked about this idea of proxemics, in which we have these different spaces, right? So when we say social distancing, we mean this kind of space right here. The intimate space is very close and impacts, a close conversation with a very close friend, family member, or maybe partner. A personal relationship, that's oftentimes how close you are when you're talking to somebody, at least before COVID. In a public space, would be something like what you'd be doing for next week. Proxemics deals with the idea that our physical location and proximity to other people definitely impacts how we communicate with them. Somebody is standing right in front of you and very close to you. That kind of intimate one-on-one communication is very different than speaking to a larger group. We also have a circadian rhythm, right? Our brains go through this process, waking up, getting through the day, crashing. If you're like me, you're on caffeine, so it's a series of ups and downs. When conflict happens, right? Agreeing, creating good communication, being specific about the issues that come up for the group, focusing on the task or the people, as we talked about, and creating agreed upon ways of addressing conflict. And as we've mentioned, are all crucial components. If things are going out of hand, put a pin on it. And then sometimes, right, things can spiral out of control, become shouting and yelling matches if it feels like people are creating less and less trust. So it's important for a leader or facilitator to intervene and to try to refocus and redirect the conversation when they need to. That's an important component of good leadership. And then lastly, one method that's proposed is known as the SLASH method of dealing with conflict. kind of interesting, right? You sit on or take the time to deal with the conflict. You listen and try to take into the accounts and perspectives shared by people in the group. You ask what people are thinking about, what concerns they have, why they feel the way that they do. You compromise or meet in the middle, find a solution that works best with people, right? Kiss is a weird final step, but actually the creator of this says yes, like in a kiss on the cheek kind of way. Another way of thinking about this is like kiss and make up, or finding some sort of positive method of reconciliation. If you all agree, handshake, or you say, hey, I appreciate it. Sounds like we've solved the problem. So this would refer to a final resolution. Yeah, right. And that can feel awkward when the conflict isn't resolved or you're not quite there, right? That's a good example though, Haley, right? The idea that oftentimes our parents or people close to us will ask, okay, hey, can you two be friends? Or can you all shake on it, right? After you kind of talk, because it's trying to encourage that last step of civility at the end. So what I'm going to have you all do in the remaining time in class is say you're developing a presentation for a psychology class. I want you all to take some time to share, if you were working on that presentation with your group, what issues you might have that might impact your completion of this presentation, your concerns about possible sources of conflict if you work together on this presentation, and how you might address or deal with that conflict. So I'll just ask one person per group to write or type. So let's do 2 face-to-face groups. We'll have 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then on Zoom, we have a total of 9 people. So we'll do 2 breakout rooms, each with 4 people. So have one person in your group write or types. And for this, I'm asking you to think about, if you were involved in a group presentation with other students, how would you address and deal with potential conflict?
Having those aspects and being afraid that the other people in my group are also having those concerns, and not trusting them to whatever. Everything that may impact my I'm just trying to get all from the the high activity points.
What are your concerns? Sorry about that. Oh no. I'm running on like 4.5, 5 hours of sleep. So I'm sorry.
No.
I know what you're talking about.
It's
Got
not going to turn, don't worry.
Yeah.
Just my English major brain.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I deserve to be held accountable if I'm identifying it as your paper.
Okay, so I just need to- How would you do this process? Like, what's the conflict? Then like also that you. I mean, work session. Somewhere.
And finding times that work for everybody, right? Or times that they feel like they're able to really focus or work well with their circadian rhythm.
I think something that also helps to be breaking down those aspects. So like, for example, if you divide it out, but then you can like divide it even further for your part that you need. Like, by this time, I'm gonna get this done and making sure I'm good. You know what I mean?
Like,
Kind of like a joke.
like this.
Yeah.
We have to do this and this and this.
Easier to build.
If issues or problems came up, how could your group like, deal with that, right? So if people disagree, if don't work together well.
Do you think you companies resell little products? Yeah. Because it's still doesn't do that. But that's one part of it. Yeah. There's like one more. What you can get. So it's kind of like a. Yeah, and just accept it and move forward. Yeah. I mean, not saying that you just like be like, all right, pass, but I would do it to be like, hey, you may not have been able to do this. Is there any way you can get this done for me and we'll help you get back already? That goes into the whole aspect of people want to do things that they think they can complete. If they're already around to be like, oh my God, I'm not gonna be able to do this. You're gonna want to redesign for something. I mean, and there's also a difference between them being lazy and them actually.
Yeah, that sweet spot of just the right amount of challenge for them. They're not lazy and unfocused, but they're also not like overwhelmed. So seems like folks have some good ideas here. I'll let you go ahead and finish up. Few things that I noticed, right, were the ideas of people kind of splitting up tasks, finding good times of day for settings in which people work together, giving people tasks that are the right amount of challenge, and also giving people the opportunity to openly express or use meetings to share concerns that they have. So really good observations you all came up with. To wrap up for today, we talked about some of the ways in which our groups manage and deal with conflict. The conflict is not bad, it's just a way that we can work together on issues. So this Friday, again, we don't have a face-to-face meeting if you don't want to, but I will be here and available to help you in addition to office hours for your presentation and your essay. So best of luck as you're continuing to work on that and wrap up. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you, if not on Friday, next Monday. Presentations do not need to be made scary. We're all here to support and work together. So if you're feeling anxiousness or nerves about that, I am happy to help you and support you in having a good experience